Okay, so for next time, remember that you're just going to be reading the next two books of the Odyssey, right? Books 11 and 12, which will be the Journey to the Underworld, the Sirens, and the Oxen of the Sun. Right? Those will be the major episodes that we'll be looking at next time. Also, our first world building assignment is due. Ashlyn is going to be designing for us the first region of our world. And I've put a piece of poster board up there in the back that we're going to keep track of everything on, right? So when you create your region, you'll draw it up there. So does anybody have any questions about anything before we get into the material? Yes, Ashley.
I was just going to bring my, I was going to sketch it out on a piece of sketchbook paper.
Uh-huh.
Like have it out labeled. Do you just want me to copy that over onto there, or can I?
Yep, just copy it onto there. I think it'll be good for us all as we continue with this to have a visual that other people can work off of easily. And I'm just going to leave this up here all the time. I don't care if any of my colleagues complain about it. I doubt they'll even notice it. Any other questions? But yes, Carrington.
I had a question about your the syllabus and the way it's set up on for the dates. So the dates, the 24th is Tuesday. So they're on.
Yeah.
That was just an accident.
I do this every damn semester, and when somebody points it out to me, I get so pissed off, not at you but at myself, because apparently I can't read a freaking calendar. But yeah, it's just whatever the Monday or Wednesday adjacent to those days. I'm hoping I only got the month of August wrong then. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Bethany.
You said you wanted us to include a special feature in our part of the world. Can that include a garden?
Yeah, it absolutely can. Yeah. If this is some kind of special magical garden or something. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, we good now? All right, so I want to start actually by doing something that I kind of forgot to show you last time. I just want to make a note to all of you that if you go to the Georgia View site, I've got folders for each of the texts that we're reading. And in each of those folders, I have resources for you that will help you with context for the texts that we're reading. So we just wait. Because that's all that it is these days. Just waiting for something to be different one day. Okay, so click on the Odyssey, and what I've got here is a set of podcasts, websites, and just kind of various little explainers. Did I mention this last time? Am I just forgetting that I did? I did not. Okay, so I genuinely did forget. All right, good. And so some of this we'll be looking at actually probably the map of Odysseus' journey, for example, we'll look at in class next time. But I wanted you guys to know that this is here, particularly if you feel particularly stuck or confused with a particular text. Maybe getting some context for it will help you understand what it is you're reading. Okay. So let's go back to where we ended up last session. Let's remind ourselves of the definitions of fantasy and of the fantastic that we came up with. So how did we end up defining fantasy or the fantastic? What are the elements that we're looking for in fantasy?
Secondary world.
Okay. Secondary worlds, good.
Supernatural.
Yep, supernatural. All right, was there anything else?
I wrote that we had talked about unmixed with realism.
Okay.
Good versus evil.
Okay, yeah, there's often kind of good versus evil elements.
The hero's journey.
Yeah, we often expect fantasy to be built on a kind of quest model. And I think that the Odyssey is kind of like one of the texts for that, right? One of the earliest texts we have that is built on such a model. Anything else?
There's an imaginary past for the secondary world.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's often set in a kind of imaginary past. Or a reimagined past, right?
Things that aren't real or never were.
Things that aren't real or never were, yes. We could probably file that under supernatural, but I think that's a good explanation there. Okay, so this gives us a pretty good solid starting point. Now, what elements of what you read for today struck you as fantastic in this sense?
The Cyclops.
Okay, what about the Cyclops? Why is the Cyclops fantastic?
There are monsters that are that tall with one eye.
Okay, yeah, he's a giant one-eyed monster, yeah. All right. So we can file him under things that aren't real and never were, right? Okay, what other elements of this strike us as fantastic?
They're not,
Cersei.
Okay, what about Cerseis?
She has like magical powers and like turned them into they grew into pigs
Uh-huh.
and made like the potion that turned them into pigs.
Yeah. I think, yeah, how she works her magic, I think, is something we'll talk about in a minute. But the fact that she is, a magician who transforms men into animals, right? Yeah, that is clearly an element of fantastic. I think one of you last time had Elsprague de Camp's definition of fantasy, right? He specifically mentioned that it's about, demons and witches and so on and so forth, right? Things that, workable magical spells, things that don't exist in our world, right? Good. What else? What else about this so far strikes you as fantastic?
the gods.
Okay, yeah. We have the gods actually showing up and intervening with their favorite human heroes, right? Yeah, we have actual divine intervention, something that does not happen in our everyday lives. Or if it is something you believe does happen in our everyday lives, it usually does not happen in so visible a way, right? Yeah, Hermes, the messenger god, shows up and tells Odysseus what to do about Cerseis, right? Polyphemus, the Cyclops, calls down the curse of his father Poseidon onto Odysseus. So yeah, we clearly have here a world in which the gods act directly and not subtly, right? What else? Anything else about this so far strike you as fantastic?
Each island he goes to is another secondary world.
Yeah. We have a set of different secondary worlds here, right? We have the island of the Cyclops, right? The Isle of the Winds. the island of the Lestrygonians, right? Even before these, right? The Lotus Eaters. We have Cerseis Island. And most of these are variations on specific themes, right? I think one thing that I want to pick out a little bit as we're talking about this is how much the danger on some islands is based on what you eat. And on others, it's the threat of being eaten, right? So how might we divide these up according to those categories?
Cerseis is what you eat.
Yeah.
Island of the Cyclops is being eaten.
Yeah. That is clearly the threat from the Cyclops, yep.
The Lotus Eaters are what you eat.
Yes. Good.
I can't say that word.
Lestrygonians? Yeah, the Lestrygonian episode is like a variation on the Cyclops episode, right? And in some ways, I think the Lotus Eaters episode kind of prepares us for the Cerseis episode, right? Does anybody remember what's going on with the Lotus Eaters? This is really the first kind of fantasy realm that he visits, yeah.
He sends 3 men to go look inward, and they discover the Lotus Eaters, and they eat the lotus, all parts of
Yes.
the lotus, and
Uh-huh.
he goes and gets them, and he has to drag them back to the ship and strap them to the ship, because they didn't want to leave.
Yeah, they eat this magical plant, right, this magical fruit that robs you of all thoughts of home and of the desire to do anything except stay and eat the lotus, right? Cerseis operates in a similar sort of way, right? She feeds the men a potion that, combined with a spell, transforms them into animals. But the basic effect is the same, right? I think it's also noteworthy that they stay with Cerseis for, like, even after the men are returned to normal, right? Do they leave Cerseis Island right away?
Stay for a year.
Yeah, they stay for a whole year, and Odysseus's men have to remind him at that point, right? Hey, we'd like to go home. Like, we know that, this is a great and wonderful island, and the food is great, and we know that you have been enjoying a year of great sex with a beautiful goddess, right? But it's time to go. So the dangers of these what you eat islands seem to be forgetting home, right? Though once Odysseus makes his desire to return home clear, Cerseis is perfectly cooperating and helpful, right? We'll talk about why as we proceed. Now, meanwhile, these being eaten situations. What do these islands have in common? The island of the Cyclops and the island of the Lestrygonians. Apart from the fact that they're inhabited by cannibals.
They're all shepherds.
Yeah. So one of the things that's going on in the Odyssey, kind of more broadly, is a kind of struggle between what a Greek audience would regard as civilization and barbarism. And let's first think about how the Greeks of Homer's day, and when we're talking about Homer's day, we're talking about kind of roughly the 8th century BCE, right? In fact, it might actually be a good idea to backtrack a little bit and look at some history here before we get too deeply into this. Okay, so there are 3 major works that we attribute to the poet we call Homer. The least well-known is a set of short hymns to various gods. Better known than these are the 2 epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Anybody familiar at all with the Iliad? Anybody know what the Iliad is about?
Isn't it the Trojan War?
Yeah, it's only about a brief episode in the Trojan War, right? It's about the hero Achilles' refusal to fight because he's been disrespected by the general Agamemnon. And much of the poem is concerned with the losses that Achilles' comrades suffer as he refuses to fight. And it ends with his killing of the Trojan hero Hector and Hector's father coming to Achilles to beg for the body for burial, right? So the Iliad is set in a single static location, right? All outside the walls of Troy. And, well, some episodes inside the walls of Troy, but all basically around the city of Troy, right? The Odyssey, on the other hand, is a kind of journey through fantasy land, as we're seeing here, right? The most famous parts of the poem, even though they only make up a very short portion of it, right? We're only reading roughly like 75 pages of the whole poem, which is much longer. The most famous parts of the poem are Odysseus' visits to all of these different islands in which life is quite different from the Greek norm. So, what would have been considered the norm for an 8th century BCE Greek would be first the presence of a polis, or a city. So if there's a city centered around a palace as an administrative center, ruled by a king, okay, that's step 1. Now, you only really need cities if you have achieved the level of social organization necessary for agriculture. So agriculture is element 2 here, right? Did anybody happen to notice what food Odysseus always wonders if people eat when they land on a new island? If we look on page 214, go ahead.
Wasn't it bread?
Yeah. If we look, like, for example, on page 214, when he sends scouts to go find find out what's on the island of the Lotus Eaters, right? Once we'd had our fill of food and drink, I sent a detail ahead, 2 picked men and a third, a runner, to scout out who might live there. Men like us, perhaps, who live on bread. Now, why might bread, or the presence of bread, be a more reliable indicator of civilization than the presence of meat or even cheese?
Because you have to grow the wheat and harvest it and process it.
Exactly, yeah, it's a processed food, right? that requires intensive farming, intensive agriculture. So the presence of bread for Odysseus is a sign of civilization as well, right?
Also might mean they're less likely to eat meat.
That's also perhaps true, yeah. They might, yeah, people who eat bread might find other human beings more and less appetizing, right? But we have all these alternatives to eating bread, though. These different from the Lotus Eaters to the Laestrygonians, right? People isn't the only thing on the spectrum here. Gender relations are also an important element here of determining whether a place is civilized or not, from a Greek perspective, right? So one thing that the Greeks observed in their daily lives was a kind of strict gender separation, right? The basic unit of social organization for the Greeks was the oikos, or single-family household. And the oikos was a patriarchal structure. Right? The man was meant to be the dominant figure in the oikos. And all dealings with the world outside the home were the province of the man. So Greek culture was, or at least Greek elite culture, because that's what we actually know about. We don't really know that much about how the ordinary lived. Greek elite culture was predominantly what we call homosocial. Right. What that means is that men spent most of their time with other men and women spent most of their time with other women. Right. That people's social lives were built around socializing with members of their own gender, rather than the opposite sex. Right. So these kinds of divisions and patriarchal structures, for someone like Odysseus, are also signs of civilization. Oh, go ahead.
And this is probably from, like, the front of the house was called like the domo, and the back of the house was the doma, or something like that.
I think that's
more
that's
Roman.
Latin. Yeah, although the Latin domus is actually based on the Greek oikos.
Okay.
The Romans took and adopted a lot of elements of Greek culture, like not least of which was the Greek religion, right? The last thing that you expect to find in a civilized place is hospitality. Right? Hospitality was considered a sacred law, a sacred rule, right? If someone came to you as a guest and asked for your help, it was your duty to give them as much help as they required, right? No more and no less. So, this is one of the reasons why we see, say, Odysseus sometimes like dropping down and hugging someone's knees, right? This is the official gesture of the supplicant asking for hospitality, right? Requesting that he be given succor in this place, right? Now, we find varying degrees of what Odysseus would consider civilized on the islands that he visits, right? But all of them present some sort of alternative to the ordinary Greek vision of civilization. Usually, they're presented as negative alternatives, right? But I think that like what's going on here is related to the overall theme of the epic, right? So when we're talking about genre, right? So we've already looked at elements that we think are fantastic that relate to fantasy. Now the epic is a kind of important precursor to what we would think of as fantasy. Right? A lot of modern fantasy is built on the model of the epic. So what is an epic? Can anybody define an epic for me? Okay, it can be, and often is. What kinds of ideas do we associate with the word epic, even if we can't define the literary genre?
Great battle.
Or something amazing.
Okay, yeah, it's big, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it involves struggle in some sense, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Isn't an epic just like a story about like a journey, and then like it's like about common man, right? And then some people can look up to it and like, oh, I'm not sure what that's about.
Well, it's not always a journey, because the Iliad isn't a journey, right? People don't really go anywhere in the Iliad, but it's still an epic. But I think we're moving in the right direction here, right? So an epic is a long narrative poem generally about some kind of civilizational struggle. Right? The stakes in an epic are very high, right? The fate of a people or of a nation hang in the balance. In a more modern epic like Paradise Lost, right? The very fate of humanity hangs in the balance, right? And the epic, in this case, is concerned with a theme the Greeks called nostos. Now, nostos is the root of our world nostalgia. And nostos means something like return or homecoming. And in Greek poetry, usually a nostos narrative involves, say like a shipwreck who is then brought back to his native place, right? But a nostos is concerned not so much with, say, changing the status quo, but with restoring it, right? It's a narrative of restoration. Right, bringing things back to normal, setting things to rights. Right, so Odysseus is wandering the ocean, trying to get home after a 10-year war in order to restore his family and his kingdom, right? That's the basic idea behind the whole poem. And in a lot of ways, these little fantasy islands are detours along the way here. But they also tell us a lot about the way the Greeks saw themselves and their neighbors. So let's start with the Cyclops episode, because that's probably Probably the best known single episode in this part of the poem. What did you guys think of? Was there anything particularly interesting or weird you guys found about the Cyclops?
Polyphemus is a hermit. Like, it seems like all the other Cyclops kind of, but they have their own cave, and each male Cyclops is in charge of what happens in his cave. But in a way, they all interact, and then Polyphemus just is a loner.
Okay, so Polyphemus, yep, is a loner or hermit, sure. And, you know, in the description you just gave of the Cyclops, right? What do we already notice? What do the Cyclops lack? What do they not have? There's no king, right? And do they have cities or any kind of recognizable social order? So let's have a quick look at the description of the Cyclops Island, starting on page 214. Can I get somebody to read from there we sailed on, our spirits now at a low ebb?
We sailed on our morale sinking, and we came to the land of the Cyclops. Lawless savages who leave everything up to the gods. These people neither plow nor plant, but everything grows for them unsown. Wheat, barley, and vines that bear, clusters of grapes watered by rain from Zeus. They have no assemblies or laws, but live in high mountain caves, ruling their own children and wives and ignoring each other.
Okay, thank you. So that's our picture there, our first picture of Cyclops society, right? So what do we get? Like, how would we describe the Cyclops society as it's pictured for us here? Is there a word we might apply to this?
It's almost like a utopia. You don't have to really work, but you have food and resources, plenty.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the land just seems to give forth, right? There's a kind of golden age abundance here. And what else can we tell about their society from this? If we had to apply a label to, say, the Cyclops political system or system of social organization, what might we call it?
There's order, but it's also anarchy.
Yeah. It's kind of libertarian or anarchist, right? They don't have any laws. They never meet to make counsel. Each household is a law unto itself, right? There's no society to speak of. Not a care in the world for any neighbor. Now, can I get somebody to continue from about line 128, like from now a level island stretches flat across the harbor.
Now a level island stretches flat across the harbor, not close inshore to the Cyclops coast, not too far out, thick with woods where the wild goats breed by hundreds. No trampling of men to start them from their lairs. No hunter roughing it out on the woody ridges. Stalking query ever raid their haven.
Mm-hmm.
No flood browse, no plow land, roll with wheat, unplowed, unsown forever, empty of humankind. The island just feeds droves of living goats. For the Cyclops have no ships in crimson prose, no shipyards there to build them good trim craft that could sell them out of foreign ports of tall as most men risk the seas to trade with other men. Such artisans would have made this island too a decent place to live in. No mean spot. It could bear you any crop you like in season. The water meadows along the low foaming shore, run soft and moist, and your vines would never flag. The land's clear of plowing, harvest on harvest, a man could reap a healthy stand of grain. The subsoil is dark and rich.
Okay, you can stop there, right? So what else do we note about the habits of the Cyclops here? What else do the Cyclops lack? Yeah, no craftsmen, right? Right. No Cyclops carpenters, no Cyclops plumbers, no Cyclops shipwrights, right? And there's one more thing it notes here the Cyclops lack. And this is related to their lack of ships and shipwrights. What else do they not have?
An economy?
Yeah, no real economy.
Or formal trade?
No formal trade, yeah. And you're thinking along the right lines here. Keep going.
They don't have a set currency or trade. Sorry.
Yeah. No need for a currency if you don't trade, right? But what else does trade require? Yeah, exactly. You gotta have somebody to trade with, right? There's no contact with other societies here, right? Right, this place is completely enclosed. Socially, anyway, right? The Cyclops have no relationships with their neighbors of any sort. So all of this would be in opposition to Odysseus' picture of civilization, right? And what do we notice Odysseus starting to do after he thinks about the Cyclops' lack of ships here? Such artisans would have made this island a decent place to live in. And then what does he start going on about?
He started talking about like the quality of the land itself.
Yeah. Right. The land's good, the harbor's good, right? There's much that could be made of this, right? The implication being that the Cyclops aren't. So Odysseus always thinks in terms of what he can do with something, right? And what he's thinking about here as they land on this island, they don't know who lives there. They don't actually know who lives there yet. They haven't explored it. Is what he could do to exploit this land, right? So Odysseus is, on the one, he's, the hero. We're supposed to identify with him, but he's also a trickster, a manipulator, and an exploiter. Right.
Conqueror mindset.
Yeah, yeah. And indeed, why do they go into the interior of the island at all? What does he hope to get? Why do they wait in the Cyclops cave? What does he expect?
To just take what he wants. And you wait for the Cyclops to leave so that they can eat their fill of the cheeses, and then wait for the Cyclops to step out to escape and take what the flock that they've escaped on. They take it and slaughter it and eat it and sacrifice of it to the god.
That's close. So yeah, they do go into the Cyclops' cave, right? And they wait there, and they eat his cheese, right? They just help themselves to it. Why do they think they have a right to it? And what are they actually waiting for from the Cyclops?
Guest gift.
Yeah, they want guest gifts, right? And they're expecting hospitality, so they just go ahead and help themselves, right? And then when they encounter something that is outside of their particular expectations and experience, things go south pretty quickly, right? So we see this pattern repeat on most of the other islands as well, until slowly the number of ships Odysseus has with him gets whittled down to one. Right? One ship and one crew left. Now, how is the danger represented by Cerseis different? And I think that there's actually a kind of interesting thing here with the what you eat and being eaten going on here. What's the first thing they eat on Cerseis Island? Did anybody happen to notice?
Is it me?
It is meat. Where do they get it?
They found a stag.
Yeah, they kill a stag, right? Let's look for a second on page 235. Can I get somebody to start reading from our line 171? I was well on my way down.
I was well on my way down, nearing our ship, when a god took pity on me. Wandering all alone, he sent me a big stag with high branching antlers. Right across my path, the sun's heat forced him down from his forest range to drink at a river's banks. Just bounding out of the timber when I hit him, square in the backbone halfway down the spine, and my bronze spear went punching clean through. He dropped in dust, groaning, gasping out his breath. Treading on him, I wrenched my bronze spear from the wound, left it there on the ground, and snapping off some twigs and creepers, twisted a rope about a fathom long. I braided it tight, hand over hand, when lashed the four hocks of the magnificent beast.
Okay, so you can stop there, right? Now, have any of you ever read the Iliad? Any of you familiar at all with the Iliad? Ish. Okay.
It's been a minute.
So I don't necessarily expect you to pick up on this right away just from reading this, but the killing of the stag here and the kind of like claiming it as trophy mirrors very closely the description of the death of a warrior in the Iliad. Right? When a warrior is killed in single combat in the Iliad, it often looks exactly like this. You know, the bronze spear punctures the soft windpipe or pierces the spine, and he drops in the dust, right? Now, given what we know about Cerseis Island, and what Odysseus and his men will soon discover, what's that?
It's a person.
Yeah, the stag could very well be a human being, right? So their visits to these various secondary worlds, these different islands, right, are perhaps making them complicit in certain cannibalistic enterprises, right? And I think that, you know, we might also relate this back to the way Odysseus describes his journey starting, right? Does anybody remember what the last thing he does in the real world is before he gets blown off course into Fantasyland?
Trojan horse.
Not quite. It's not the Trojan horse, but it is near the beginning of book 9.
He's telling a story.
He's telling a story. And as he starts a story, what's the first stop? he says he made. After the wind drove him out of Ilium, that is Troy. The wind drove me out of Ilium onto Ismaris, the Cicones stronghold. There I sacked the city, killed the men, but as for the wives and plunder, the rich haul we dragged away from the place, we shared it round so no one, not on my account, would go deprived of his fair share of spoils. Then I urged them to cut and run, set sail, but would they listen? Not those mutinous fools. There was too much wine to swill, too many sheep to slaughter, down along the beach and shambling longhorn cattle. And all the while the Cicones sought other Cicones, calling for help from their neighbors living inland. A larger force and stronger soldiers too, skilled hands at fighting men from chariots, skilled when a crisis broke to fight on foot. Out of the morning mist they came against us, packed as the leaves and spears that flower forth in spring, and Zeus presented us with disaster, me and my comrades, doomed to suffer blow upon mortal blow.
A pointless raid.
What's that?
He fights a pointless war, then turns around and does a pointless raid.
Yeah. So the first thing he does upon leaving Troy is raid a city he thinks is defenseless, right? And I think this is in keeping with his whole notion of the Cyclops land as something to be used, right? That Odysseus is himself kind of a devourer.
Finders, keepers, losers, neighbors.
Yeah. And I think the killing and eating of this stag that might really be a person is kind of in keeping with that whole narrative of potential cannibalism, right? Yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
Why is cannibalism such a big thing?
Cannibalism is a pretty serious taboo in Greek society.
Like, does it symbolize something? Because we keep talking about it.
Yeah. And it is a mark of barbarism, right? Eating other people is a mark that you are uncivilized and ignorant, right? Even more so than the lack of these other characteristics in your society, right? There are myths concerning, let's say, there's the myth of a king named Tantalus who tried to trick the gods into eating human flesh, thus kind of defiling themselves by killing his own son, Pelops, and kind of making it a meal. And of course, the gods being gods detected it, brought the boy back to life, and sent the king down to Hades for eternal punishment.
But he can never get a sip of water or...
Yeah, Tantalus is the one who has to stand neck deep in a river, and every time he bends his mouth to take a drink, the water retreats. And there's a cluster of grapes hanging over him, and every time he tries to bite one of the grapes, they pull away. But yeah, there seem to be kind of strong social and religious taboos in Greek society against cannibalism. And that's something the Cyclops, the Laestrygonians, and perhaps even Odysseus with his thoughtless violence violate.
Because, for me, I just thought of it's supposed to be a sign of barbarism, right?
Yeah.
And so, when you mentioned the stag, how it was possibly a person, then they did they did cannibalism. They were cannibals for a second.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like a symbol where it's like they're all the same, but they don't know it. That's what I think. Yeah,
that maybe they're not any better than the people of these islands. And I think that was kind of where I was going, right? Especially by pointing back to the raid on the unprovoked raid on the Cicones, right? That that Odysseus and his men are, in a way, kind of like wolves themselves, right? So let's try to unpack the Cerseis episode here a little bit. Now, Cerseis, interestingly, also does turn these guys into food animals, right? She turns them into pigs. She doesn't eat any of them. But she does turn them into an animal that is commonly eaten. Now, Cerseis' method of transformation, Cerseis' style of magic is one that the Greeks particularly associated with women, with sorceresses, pharmakon. What do you think this means, given Cerseis' behavior and given maybe other words that this looks like? Pardon?
She does potions.
Yeah, potions, herbs, and drugs, right? That is how she works her magic. So like the Lotus Eaters, she gives people dangerous plants. Or dangerous mixtures of plants. And what's weird about Cerseis Island? What is Cerseis Island missing? Yeah. She only has female servants, right?
Nymphs.
Yeah.
There's not any mortal people, like mortals on there. It's all nymphs or demigods.
That's true. Yeah, Circe's a goddess and her servants are nymphs. Yeah. So yeah, there are no mortals, and yeah, I think more importantly, no men, right? And Circe tends to work her magic, right, using a cup and the gift of a cup. So just sit on that for a minute, right? Now, when Hermes makes his way down to help Odysseus, right? What's the advice he gives Odysseus in dealing with Circe? How is he supposed to get around Circe's magic?
He's supposed to hold the plant.
Okay, yeah, he's like, I'm going to give you a special plant. Yep.
He's supposed to hold that and still drink it, but when she goes to pull out her wand to pull out his sword,
Mm-hmm.
and then refused, she's going to ask him to go to take to her bed, and he says, no, you must make this promise to me unless or you're going to unman me.
Mm-hmm.
So like he has to
Yep.
he has to get this promise from her.
Yeah, he has to draw his sword and make her swear an oath, right? So Circe is associated with the magic cup, right? Odysseus is associated with the sword. Exactly, yes. And because we're dealing with ancient Greeks here, right? The sword masters the cup. Right, the cup is what we call a Ionic symbol. Right, that is, a symbol of feminine power and fertility. And the sword is a phallic symbol. Now, so a symbol of masculine power and fertility, right? Now, we always want to be careful about applying these ideas because, even, as Freud himself said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right? But in this case, I think, as Kathy noted, like these objects are very clearly related to gender roles within a society or within a social context that encouraged and in fact kind of demanded a very rigid separation between the two genders and kind of required one to submit to the other, right? And so what Odysseus is doing in order to make Circe cooperative is essentially bringing her into a Greek oikos, right? We're going to take this all-female island and we're going to make it into an ordinary Greek social unit with a man in charge and the goddess with the lovely braids becoming simply his helpmate, right? And bedmate. And we're going to see a lot of this kind of symbolic gendered behavior, not just in ancient texts, but this is something that pops up a good bit in contemporary fantasy as well, particularly in the mid-20th century. When we look at C.S. Lewis later in the course, there's going to be a lot of this kind of discourse as well. When we look at the story of the Holy Grail from medieval French romance, there's going to be a lot of this kind of discourse as well. So this is something I think to bear in mind as we proceed. So there is one society here that Odysseus has visited that we haven't talked about at all yet. Why do you think that is? Which of the islands have we not discussed?
The Island of Giants? Or the Laestrygonians?
I guess we haven't really talked much about the Laestrygonians.
The Island of Winds.
Yeah, the Island of the Winds hasn't come up at all, right? Now, why do you think we haven't discussed this one yet, given what sorts of things we've been talking about?
Island of Winds is the closest he gets to a natural Greek society. There is the guest gift. There is this, I'm going to help you, but that's it, no more, no less. And, here's this gift to also help you on your way. And then he comes back, and he's like, I need your help again. He said, no, I already helped you once.
Yeah, the Isle of the Winds isn't really part of this, at least not obviously, part of this eat or be eaten dichotomy that we've been looking at everything in terms of, right? What elements of the Isle of the Wind segment are fantastic?
Having the north wind in a bag.
Yeah, okay, yeah, the wind's in a bag, right? Right, that you can just take the world, take all the unfavorable winds, stick them in a leather sack, and make somebody's journey home simpler as a result, right? What else about the Isle of the Wind strikes us as fantastic? What else is weird about it? We reach the Aeolian Island next, the home of Aeolus, Hippotas' son, beloved by the gods who never die. A great floating island it was, and round it all huge ramparts rise of indestructible bronze, and sheer rock cliffs shoot up from the sea to the sky. What in that is potentially fantastic?
It's a floating island.
Yeah. It's a floating island of no fixed location. And the society depicted here is also different from the Greek norm, right? The king had sired 12 children within his halls, 6 daughters and 6 sons in the lusty prime of youth. So he gave his daughters as wives to his 6 sons. Seated beside their dear father and doting mother, with delicacies aplenty spread before them, they feast on forever. All day long the halls breathe the savor of roasted meats and echo round the low moan of blowing pipes. And all night long, each one by his faithful mate, they sleep under soft-piled rugs on corded bedsteads. Okay, yeah. This island seems to be inhabited by 8 people. Or, no, not 8. 12, 14 people. And yeah, and they're incestuous, right? Now, Greek marriage typically was what we call exogamous. That means marriage outside the tribe or outside the family. However, in elite families in neighboring societies, for example, ancient Egypt, incest was common in order to keep the royal lines as pure as possible, right? So it was quite common for, for example, for siblings of the royal line in Egypt to marry one another. Yeah, well, hereditary monarchy is, a system in which, who gets to be king is based entirely on who his father was. Is in and of itself a little.
I was just talking about all the inbreeding.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just look at King Tut.
Yeah. Anywho, where was I going with this?
They're incestuous.
Okay. Yes. 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 And what do these people do all day? What's that? Yeah. Like this is actually, in one sense, more similar to the Cyclops than might first appear, right? Because they don't work. They don't have to. All they do is feast, right? All they do is party. They don't have to work.
I mean, if there's no need to work, then who's cooking the food, preparing the wine, cleaning the beds? I mean,
Never explained, right?
exactly. That's all I can think. If you're spending every single day partying,
Mhm.
someone has to prepare all this and clean it up.
Yeah, and and kind of the more I think about this, the more I kind of connect it with Odysseus's own kind of habits as warrior and pirate. The more I'm kind of thinking about, how there may be a subtle or unconscious critique of aristocratic warrior societies on the whole here, right? People who consume what the people produce without producing anything themselves. But that critique is coming through the description of these kinds of alternative worlds and alternative societies, right? That have the power to help or to hinder Odysseus on his journey. And what does Aeolus choose to do? What do the people of the Isle of the Winds choose to do? Do they help or do they hinder?
Help.
Yeah.
They host him for a month.
Yeah. In fact, they're just about the only island he comes across where the people are helpful without being threatened, right? So they do seem to obey some Greek social norms, right? There is an oikos here, even if it's not quite traditional. They do obey the laws of hospitality. And they do have like this, they do have like a citadel, right? that, you know, everybody lives in. So, what's Odysseus' fatal mistake with the gift?
He goes to sleep and his men think, oh, we just got more money, more gifts, let's open it and see what we got.
Uh-huh.
And they pushed him all away, super far away, when they were inside of land.
Yeah. He says they were in, I think one thing we always have to, just to step outside of the immediate narrative for a second, one thing we always have to remember with Odysseus' story here, right, is that this is a tale he's telling to people whom he's trying to get to help him, right? He's landed on this other island, the island of the Phaeacians, and he wants them to give him a ship so he can get home. We have no independent confirmation of any of his stories, because by the time he's telling his tale, all the other members of his crew are conveniently dead, right? So there's no one to confirm or deny anything that he says here. We also know that Odysseus is a trickster and a liar. So everything he says about anyone has to be taken with a grain of salt. But yeah, if we go to page 231, right? 9 whole days we sailed, 9 nights nonstop. On the 10th, our own land hove into sight at last. We were so close we could see men tending fires. But now an enticing sleep came on me, bone weary, from working the vessel's sheet myself no let up, never trusting the ropes to any other mate, the faster to journey back to native land. But the crews began to mutter among themselves, sure I was hauling troves of gold and silver home, the gifts of open-hearted Aeolus, Hippotas' son. The old story. One man glanced at another, grumbling, look at our captain's luck. So loved by the world, so prized at every landfall, every port of call. So what is the specific mistake Odysseus has made here? What is he, in terms of his relationship with his crew?
He doesn't trust them.
Yeah, and because he doesn't trust any of them, right? He works himself to exhaustion and thus falls asleep at the very moment of triumph, right? Meanwhile, what has he apparently not told them? What information has he apparently not shared with them?
What's in the bag?
Yeah. He hasn't told them what's in the bag. So they think he's holding out on them, right? And we've noticed already that this is a society of plunderers, right? Every place they go, they seem to kill or steal something and then share it out, right? And here we see, well, the captain has got this leather bag. He's not sharing what's in it, and he hasn't told us, right? So he must be holding out. So because Odysseus fails to place any trust in his men, the crisis occurs and they're blown back off course. And then how does Aeolus respond when Odysseus washes back up on his shore?
Go away.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Yeah.
you must more or less, you must have really ticked off the wrong person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've already helped you once, no more, no less.
And what is Odysseus's return evidence of to Aeolus?
He's cursed.
Yeah, obviously you're cursed by the gods, right?
Yeah.
I gave you everything you needed to get home. Here you are back again begging for more gifts and more help, right? Obviously the gods hate you. So get the hell off my island, right? Now, what Aeolus is referencing, and what we haven't really addressed yet, but we'll probably need to talk about next time, is the Greek belief in the absolute power of fate. Right. Fate to the Greeks was represented by three goddesses called the Moirae. I think that's how it's spelled. And their names were Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, which mean roughly weaver, measurer, and cutter. And the basic idea was that Clotho wove the thread of every person's life. Lachesis measured it out, and Atropos cut it at the end. So whatever was supposed to happen to you was going to happen no matter what you did. Now, it might come about in an unexpected way, depending on the choices you made or depending on what other people did to you. But what was supposed to happen to you would always happen. And the fact that Odysseus doesn't get home and washes up on the shores of this weird floating island yet again, to Aeolus, that's evidence that Odysseus is fated to wander, right? That he has incurred the wrath of the gods and is not to be helped again. So this attitude towards fate is something that we're going to talk a lot about when we discuss the next episode in Hades, as Odysseus questions the shade of the seer Tiresias. So let me give you some guide questions for next time to help you figure out some things to focus on. And I'll see you Wednesday. And actually, if you want to go stare at that blank piece of poster board for inspiration, go for it.
I have an idea in my head.
Uh-huh. Good.
I kind of want to make